Pioneer taxi drivers in Singapore.
You've brought your family heirlooms to our roadshow and sent us emails about objects in your homes that tell amazing stories. Primary school bag. In this 6-part series, we'll be hunting for treasures to fill up the people's collection.
We'll visit institutions, archives, museums, antique shops, and your homes just to find the right objects to tell the story.
And when we're done, they'll be assembled here at the National Museum as the People's Collection for all to view. Welcome to a unique television event.
Welcome to Treasure Hunt.
So this week, we are going back to the 40s. We're in the War Memorial Park, as you can see. So I think you can guess that it's all about World War II. Memories, memorabilia, and stories.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be one tough mission today.
Really?
Well, it's a period of hardship and turmoil, and I don't think people are in the mood to collect anything.
I get it. I mean, it was a time of scarcity. But speaking of scarcity, I scarcely know anything about World War II, save for a couple of black and white films.
I have the perfect place to take you today, where you can learn all about the war in Singapore.
The Japanese occupied Singapore between 1942 and 45. It was a time of scarce resources and mass killings. We're looking for objects that will tell the story of Singapore, which the Japanese call Shonanto, Light of the South. Artifacts that show how both foreigners and locals lived through these difficult years. But before we begin our hunt, Chen and I are visiting the Ford Factory Museum, Singapore's only World War II exhibition, located at Upper Bukit Timah Road, close to the former Malayan Railway line. This museum was once Ford's first assembly plant in Southeast Asia.
Oh, this one's really pointless.
But after the war broke out, the factory was used by the British to build fighter planes.
Yeah.
And when the Japanese took over, they used it for building trucks and other vehicles for their armed forces.
So, Anita, this is possibly the best place in Singapore to learn about the story of the Second World War.
Really?
This is the only museum in Singapore dedicated to it. But not only that, the really special thing is, on February 15, 1942, this was the place which the British surrendered to the Japanese right here in this hall.
Japan's Lieutenant General Tomoyuki Yamashita, Commander-in-Chief of the 25th Army, moved his military headquarters here when the Japanese invaded Singapore. And it was also here that the Battle of Singapore was concluded, when Lieutenant General Percival, commander of the British forces, signed the surrender document in this boardroom. The exhibits here are a treasure trove of national and personal stories. Recipes put together by a prisoner of war. A radio used to broadcast Japanese propaganda. That's beautiful. And even a wedding dress worn by a bride who got married during the occupation. They form a testament to the sheer complexity of life during the war years. Now that we have a glimpse of what life during the war was like, we're off to meet our first lead. We're told of a lady who lives in Tiong Bahru with a very special artifact related to the story of her birth. Hello! Hello! 71-year-old Mary Pereira is a retired teacher. In 1974, she brought her grandfather's belongings back from India.
Treasure chest.
Along with everything else, there's a treasure chest, in which the family's most treasured possessions are now kept. It also holds Mary's most important personal possession.
I like to show you this. You see, this is my birth certificate. I was born in this arid shelter.
Okay. Hang on a minute. You were born in the arid shelter during the war.
During the
During
war.
the Second World War,
Yes.
right?
I just got goosebumps.
Where bombs were falling and everything around
Yes.
you, and you were born inside.
I was born in that arid shelter, and actually I was not due for January. I was due in February. But what happened? My father was mobilized because he's in the volunteer corps. So he was called for duty on January 21st. So when he went, my mom was really afraid because we were living in Tian Street, that's in Chinatown, and she could hear the planes and everything. So when he did not come back, she felt sure something happened
to him.
So she went to the mortuary to look for his body, really, thinking can give him a proper funeral. But then the air raid started to, the siren blew. So she quickly came home, and the air raid shelter was just next block. So she went down. That was about 7 o'clock. But at 12:15, she had pain. It was labor pain.
Mary was born on the 22nd of January 1942, a little past midnight. Though this birth certificate was only issued in the 1960s by the KK Hospital.
History of Singapore. This is my brother Andrew.
Mary's brother Andrew was then just 6, but he has some vivid recollections of the day Mary was born.
I was there with my mom, yeah. You could see the night sky lit up with searchlights, searchlights going across the night sky, and you could also hear the sound of sirens.
So many members of your family were involved in war.
Yes.
Yeah. My father was
Was in the street settlements.
Street volunteer. Then Uncle Francis
Was conscripted by the Japanese because he was a surveyor. And he was taken to Thailand to do the railway.
Mary's uncle Francis was one of those who worked on the infamous Death Railway, a line that ran between Thailand and Burma. The railway was well named. Tens of thousands of prisoners of war died in abject conditions as forced laborers for the Japanese.
From this series of documents here, you can see that the Uncle Francis, for example, still remit money back all the way from Thailand. Well, the Japanese did pay him some sort of salary.
So what can you actually ascertain from this?
Well, of the 7th January, this is still the Roman calendar, of course, but they have changed the calendar year to the Imperial Japanese calendar.
2006?
It says 2604.
Japanese year.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, this works out to be 1943.
Okay.
So in 1943 or so, Uncle Francis sent back $30. This will probably be the
Princely sum of the time.
princely sum, but of course black market back then might not mean much. Now you might need banana notes and things like that.
But official.
Official, yes, official. I sent it to Miss Gomez.
That is
M. Gomez.
Mrs. Matilda Gomez,
There we
my
go.
grandmother.
Okay.
There's another document here which I think is quite interesting. Look, this is your baptism certificate. Officially, it's on the Church of Lady of Lourdes.
It's in that registry.
You were actually really baptized in the Cathedral of Good Shepherd. This, of course, this document was the real lifeline for Mary herself, because this was the only thing that she had. When the British military administration came back in 1945, September, they had a hard time trying to register various aliens and various people, and you would definitely needed an identity because you were still drawing rations for the military, your rice, cooking oil and whatnot. So everyone would have gone forward and tried to give proof of evidence that they were living here and stuff.
Thank God my mother kept that paper.
Mary, I have never been in an air shelter. I mean, we have bomb shelters built into modern HDB blocks. I think that completely pales in comparison to what you were actually born into. Would you take us there?
Yes, of course, of course. I was born there.
Singapore was bombed continually in the opening days of 1942. There were few air raid shelters, so most hid in monsoon drains and rubber plantations. Even open areas were considered safer than homes. The logic was, at least you could see the planes coming. Those who found their way to an air raid shelter were considered fortunate.
I think if you go back to the place of your birth, there will be that feeling inside, you know. That makes you feel very important, like, wow, this is where I was born. Whether you were born in a taxi or in a hospital or in an air raid shelter.
Built in 1939, the Tiong Bahru Air Raid Shelter is the last remaining shelter in Singapore. And according to Mary's birth certificate, this was where she was born.
So looking at there seems to be different compartments or rooms, so to speak. So something like this itself. So I mean, if it were me, if I were the doctor or the military official in charge, they would have allocated different compartments, you know, one for dispensary, one for
Could very well
something like that. Yeah. So we have quite a number of these structures.
Yes.
Unfortunately, of course, there's no physical evidence. I wish we can find the bedpan or the bed.
How would there have been beds in here? How would they have gotten things in here? How do you give birth in an air raid shelter?
Someone from the National Heritage told me that they think there are rumors that there was a tunnel connected to the old Sepoy hospital to here.
Yeah, indeed, there are a lot of these urban legends about these tunnels and stuff in Singapore, especially World War II tunnels, so it's rightful with these things.
And I think it was well equipped and there was administrative staff there.
I think it's quite remarkable that we're so organized during wartime.
It was organized.
There is even a segment in this shelter itself where it's reserved for the air raid protection wardens. So these are the guys who are volunteering to, you know, hit the gongs and make a lot of noise to get people in the shelter. Speaking of preparedness, they would have issued little booklets like that for people, say protection against air raid. So.
It says here, immediately on hearing the warning as head of the household, you should supervise the following precautions, you know?
The British had a lot of experience. The Second World War started in Europe, so in June 1940. So they will have some sense of what to expect in the coming war in the East. And finally, when it's here, so this air raid shelter would have been prepared for it.
The Tiong Bahru shelter can accommodate up to 1,600 people. But according to old residents here, there were fewer than 100 people in the shelter during each air raid. Residents would hide here for about 20 minutes until the all cleared. Sadly, on the day Mary was born, her father was killed in an air raid. He had signed up with the volunteer corps, and her mother's last words to him as they said goodbye were, "Be careful."
She was already very traumatized because she kind of knew my father died. So I don't think she was thinking of her pregnancy so much as the loss of her husband at that moment.
Sure.
Because she had already, before the siren blew, she had gone to the mortuary to find her husband's body. So that was what was in her mind. Memories just rushed to my mind. I thought of my father, thought of my mother giving birth to me here. And I am most grateful that we had this air raid shelter because I doubt I would have been alive.
It's a moving story. Mary's birth certificate, her baptism certificate, and Uncle Francis's remittance slip certainly belong in the People's Collection. As we continue our hunt for more World War II related treasures, we find an ordinary tiffin carrier with an extraordinary story.
The few antique dealers have offered me some money, but I would never sell it. It has so many memories.